Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 5th day of Design Doha Forum. My name is Jelena Trkulja. I'm the editorial director of the forum. And we will begin without any further delay with a wonderful panel we have prepared for you on branding. I would like Mr. Jorge Pinto to come and introduce his panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. And thank you for joining us here today. This is the last day, so let's start in the best way possible. And I would like really to invite now the speakers, the reason for why you are coming here, to join me, and we will start our session. غادة, please join. Shahira and Rashid, please also come and join us. We have a very limited time. And of course, most of the time is for our speakers. So what we did was, when we received the invitation and saw the topic, I thought it was interesting to ask each of them to produce a reflection. And each of them did send a reflection. And then we thought it would be interesting also to have an image to start that conversation. So what we'll do is, first I will ask each of you to present yourselves. And I was saying it's always very interesting to see in the times we live in, how do you present yourself? What is your job? What is your profession? How do you see yourself? And then we'll start to deep dive into our topic in a very friendly conversation with the speakers and maybe even with you, the audience. So غادة, I'll start with you. Can you present yourself to us?
Hello, everyone. My name is غادة الخاطر. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you all guests for coming here today. I'm an artist and a branding consultant, but this question across this week has proven to be a difficult one to answer. My work ranges from many things, from political cartoons to installations. I also write poetry. With respect to this topic, it was very interesting. Because when we talk about over-design, I was very much interested. So just to give you a background, I graduated from Virginia Commonwealth with a degree in graphic design. I also worked in Qatar museums and here and there. And with the topic of over-design, it's so broad that I was very much interested in the idea of vernacular language and how over-design has redefined language and the way we speak over time, especially with respect to different terminology that was once associated with a profession or academia. So with respect to vernacular, I was very much interested with the idea of a curator, for example. The word curator was once associated with research, academia, protection of a collection, essays, written sort of research with respect to that topic. And it sort of grew with time to become a more diluted word, sometimes a glorified word, meaning carefully selected. And that sort of delves into two different things, the idea of the promotion of the self and that I need to sound or to be more suited within or give my profession, make it sound more sophisticated, but at the same time also giving ode to different professions that allow people more chances, that you don't necessarily have to have a degree in that project for you to validate your work and the effort you do. So the different examples I have are basically like meme culture and making it so relevant to the word. Like if I just hear the word, curation one more time, basically like really sort of sums up that phrase. And then you look at the other aspect of curation, where you have some new professions that came as a result of social media. So you have the profession of a curator of a playlist. Now, this is a playlist curator can, depending on how proficient you are, can pay up to $50,000 a year. You have people curating genres for different lounges and bars and clubs. But you also have like this example of a curated playlist on Instagram. They actually call themselves that. Now, this is not a way of showing something that's better than the other. It's not to say that, a curator of a museum isn't, but it's more a way of analyzing that sphere. and that profession, and just the idea of language and how it has transformed over the years. The second part of it is just the graphic designer in me, who sort of knows the marketing tricks that are applied with respect to language to different packages we buy in the supermarket, for example, or anywhere else. The same tricks that I think are applicable to over-design with respect to language. One of the biggest tricks you see are with the words and vernacular depicted here. So these are lists by the FDA, for example, with respect to the word natural or naturally sweetened. We all know, for example, that maple syrup or honey are substitutes to the bad white sugars, but at the same time, it also encapsulates high fructose concentrates, which are bad for like diabetics. Again, gluten-free, farm-fresh, all that sort of language that is basically an example of over-design in marketing used to kind of trick you into something and sort of over-design. So, yeah.
Thank you. And we'll pick on some of those things you just said, but Shahira, please, up to you.
No, it's on one slide.
Hello,
everyone. It's my first time to Doha. Thank you for inviting me here, and it's been great. I'm an Egyptian architect based between London and Cairo. I work I'm an architect, graduated from Cairo University, taught in different universities in the States and Cairo, but my work spans from like master planning to product design. And few of my projects are involved with UNESCO and World Heritage Sites, whether in Cairo, this is how I started, and then recently, I just finished a project in Al Ula, Zone 1 in the Old Town, which is a rehabilitation reuse of Old Town. And the reason I brought preservation and conservation and all this into the play of over-design is just because this is what I'm doing right now. I'm working also in Medina in another city planning project where there is heritage sites. And so this is very fresh in my mind. This is my daily submittals currently. But also to counter part in over-design, too much design and preservation. And since I belong to those two worlds, it's hard to navigate, but also to see, as an architect, you work in the business of service. So like, you're a service, but you have to give a face for that service. You have to give a talking head to that service, hence the branding, and hence, of course, in the super architects, there is a power. Once you have established that, there is a power, and it moves things. Architecture or building, or before I come to this preservation part, is a vehicle of a lot of things right now. Mostly money, because you produce a product, and this product is expected to be sold, or maybe the seller is already there. And if we look at cities, especially in the Middle East and in Cairo, now we have a new capital being rebranded as this is the new capital of Cairo. So much money is poured in, so many constructions, so many buildings. And this doesn't happen in Egypt only. It happens also in Europe, in UK. We find a lot of urbanism that is produced, maybe inhabited, maybe not. Maybe in our case, we never know, like it will be inhabited or not. It's still under production. And what this tells us about over-design, because over-design, if we talk about the definition that we are designing too much, or we're designing for vacant lands just to promote maybe capitalism, maybe it lingers on some propaganda for political reasons, maybe it has a lot of, but essentially, because architecture and building is one of the it's a home to house people, and also it's a capital for money all over the world. Like you can invest in gold, you can invest in this, but you invest in real estate. The percentage of investment of real estate and buildings is huge. And where the pressure of over-design and fastness and transformation. And then we look at the other part. You have zones that the UNESCO chose, or like put their definition and recognition that this is a preserved site. You can't touch, But even when we handle preservation, there is change. It's not that we don't design, we do design, but maybe we are more tied up. There is more regulations, there is more process, but it has changed and it will change. I entered the site in Al-Ula, it changed in 3 years. I cannot claim that preservation and conservation doesn't make you design or have some allowance. The time and the frame of work is completely different than doing a master plan from scratch. I did a master plan in Switzerland for a Andermatt, and it was empty spots. Of course, you had the town, you had some, but you have a huge allowance to play. And here, I'm just putting thoughts out. I'm not, like, when I read over design, I wasn't sure, a lot of ideas came to head, so I'm just sharing some of the thoughts that came into my mind for the discussion.
Thank you. Kariim, please.
Thank you for inviting me, by the way, here. It's very beautiful to be here. My second time in Qatar. Last time I was here was, I think, 15 years ago, so I'm sure a lot have changed. So is there a slide up there now? What do I do?
Okay, move one more. That's it.
Oh, yeah, okay. So what I want to say is I don't agree at all with the subject because I think the world is under-designed. And what I mean by under-designed is if you go from A to B, let's say I'm going to go from New York to here, how poorly the navigation is to go through this whole process. And I'm talking about on every level. I'll give you a very small example. If you are going on a plane, the plane's board the first class first or business first. So you get on the plane, if you're in business, and then you wait for 180 people to pass you by. Is that designed? It's not designed at all. Design is fundamentally a program, right? You have a mandate, you have a brief, you have criteria. You bring all the criteria in a way together to come up with the most interesting and, let's say, best solution possible. The word is a German word, right? The program, the design. That's the etymology. So I travel around the world. I work in 50 countries. I do micro to macro, meaning I design everything from a shoe or a mobile phone to a building because I don't see any difference between any of our built environment. I don't do anything virtually. I'm very interested in the physical world. So that's who I am. I call myself a creator or a designer, but even more so, I think I call myself a cultural shaper because we shape culture through our physicality, through the things we produce. Why I say under-designed is, today, a woman still can't find a high-heel shoe that's comfortable. Under-designed, right? The chairs that you're sitting on right now, completely under-designed. I thought it was going to break when I sat on it. And why are there cushions on the chairs? There is an afterthought. Oh, they're very uncomfortable, so let's add a cushion. At least when Werner Panton did this chair, which is now 70 years old, this chair, still far superior in comfort to a lot of the chairs that come to market. In April, in Milano, they show 15,000 new products every year. Can you imagine this? Because you have 5,000 companies showing minimally 3 new products. Of those 15,000 products, we're saturating, we're destroying the earth, we're overproducing, we're overconsuming, and yet a lot of what we're consuming and producing doesn't have any real place in our daily lives. Design is about making a better life, and it's a social act. It's a creative act, of course. It's a social act, it's a political act, it's an economic act. But design is about elevating the human experience and progressing and evolving humanity. It's that simple, really. That's what design is. And very few firms, very few designers, very few architects, and I could go on and on, are really thinking on a social level that way of making the world better for others. Design is not a selfish act. It's almost a selfless act in a way. So when I design a chair, I have to think about if the chair is going to be produced 20,000 pieces a year, I have to be smart about it. I have to be responsible. I have to think about the sustainability of it. I have to think about the end cycle. I have to think about how it's shipped from one country to another, or if it's shipped onward and onward. If I design a mobile phone, I just did a few years ago, in 1 year of use of that phone, 70 million people had it in their hand. So I have to think about the use. I have to think about the interface, how it works, how it feels, et cetera, et cetera. To me, that's design. The world is completely under-designed, and in fact, it's become so style and image-driven that we're forgetting about the importance of our three-dimensional and five-sensorial world that we live in. It's not about an image design whatsoever. And we become image-driven. 1.4 billion images a day on the internet are going into the cloud. Every day, 1.4 billion. The amount of imagery. So we start to believe that design is a nice, beautiful image. That's not design whatsoever. Design is about making the world simply a better place. Second, just go to the next slide. Look at this. That's over-designed as far as I'm concerned. So we've lived through history where we were so incredibly decadent, and the things that we did that were so superficial, that were strictly based on style with zero function. And we still prevail and keep doing that, still producing and producing style for the sake of style. Definition of style, when you borrow from history. Design, when you work with the criteria of the moment to shape the future. Simply put. Look at this now. So I want to just talk about, because you mentioned personal branding, right? Look at this person. I mean, this is absurd, right? How much are they paid to walk around like that? Nothing. When I was a teenager, Pepsi truck pulled up at our high school and gave us all free Pepsi t-shirts so we could advertise Pepsi. 20 years later, you paid 25 euro for the Pepsi t-shirt. Today, you're paying thousands of euro to walk around and tell the world that you're advertising Gucci, right? This is absurd. So really, simply put, the world is under-designed and over-branded. Look at this. I mean, seriously? Look at this. I mean, this, you know, we're living in a very absurd time, and I think we're going to move to, eventually, no brand. It's starting already to happen. We're going to remove these things from our everyday lives. And then I'm going to end with this last image. So don't ever think that the world is over-designed today. It was over-designed then, and that wasn't design.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Karim, if I may interject, it's actually started to happen. There's a quiet, rich movement happening right now on TikTok, and it's anti-branding. So
right.
It's happening.
But you know, the thing about, it's interesting you say that, because it's not really the rich that are wearing that. It's the people who want to be rich, or are trying to emulate being rich, or trying to show off that they have some sort of money, or they are in status quo, right?
So the idea was exactly to see three different approaches to the topic and this word of over-design. And clearly, we have seen, especially in the last 30 years, the issue of design thinking, and design thinking being used everywhere, from public services to the creation of goods. And design thinking has been, and is still considered, the right approach, because in design thinking you bring the needs, you bring the individual to the core of what we do. But at the same time, what we see in many occasions is and this is something I would like, is that we bring the architect, we bring the designer as a way to create something that is very far from this design thinking and very far from the principles of design. And so the designer or the architect or the maker becomes part of this logic and accepts this logic. And I wonder if the reason why you have to do it is, like you said, because I have to sell products, I have to pay my business, I have to carry on. So in a way, what I would like to have you as your reflection, if we are in this situation because of, in many cases, of the work of the architects, of the designers, of the brand people, that have created this idea of aspirations and expectations that we all want to have and aspire to have. Do you feel that, in a way, you are co-responsible for this same situation that now we are here discussing?
We all work in this field, so I'm sure we're okay with it. Like, we're okay that we're designers and we're designing. And it's been there always. Yani, it's there in history as well. Even if we don't know all the names, but especially in Islamic architecture, you can try to find the roots of who did that and who built that. And in Pharaoh, ancient Egypt, you have the names of the architects. Amenhotep was one of the famous architects. So it's not that having a face and a name and doing that, it's been there.
I just interject. I wouldn't say it's the architects or the designers or the creators. I think it's sort of the branding, marketing. I mean, that's the world that's sort of, let's say, exploiting all this. You know, if you're an architect or a designer and you're a responsible and fairly smart, astute person, you want to do a good work. You know, your interest is to put up a building that's going to sit around for 200 years and really be a great experience for whatever the program is. So it's not our fault. It's not mea culpa. I think that a lot of designers I know. I had a friend, brilliant. He's in San Francisco. I'm saying he's, of all my years of practice, I've been practicing almost 40 years. I think he's the best designer I ever met. Very amazing guy. He left the profession 15 years ago completely because he felt it was his fault of consumption and hyperconsumption. He's a product designer. And I kept saying to him that, you know what, whether we're involved or not, the machines of the 21st century are going to keep plugging away. And most buildings right now are actually done without architects. And even so, more so with AI, most of our creative professions are going to disappear. So the machine that it's all about monies and about, how can I say, capitalism, is there with or without us. What our addition is, at least maybe we can interject and do something a little better. You know, and every time I go by a really bad building, a new building coming up, no matter what city I am in, I see it under construction, I go, lost opportunity. Because if you hired a good architect, for example, on that project, which is what, 5% of the cost, 3%, whatever it is, right? The building, for the same amount of time, same amount of effort, same amount of resources, same amount of people, same amount of, you would have ended up with a really nice building. It's that simple of an equation. And I'd say 95% of what's being constructed in the world is just banal, developer-driven architecture.
I wanted to sort of link it to this idea of language again with respect to authenticity. So responsibility here is also a question of authenticity. So when branding first started, it was merely a factor of information. I am responsible to give you the information that you will be consuming. It didn't need to be very well designed, but because of trends and certain specific trends and the need to capture attention, the need to stand out more and more and more in a mass industrialized or, with capitalism, of course, has driven the marketing and branding world so much that by the time you also have like a proper product that is actually natural, it's so diluted that it doesn't mean anything at this point. But the question of authenticity also comes along because with elements of social media, you've also had to brand yourself as a certain way in order to be recognized, the need to be recognized in many ways. And this is where responsibility comes in. In the 60s and 50s, we saw ads that advertised that smoking is healthy for you. And so all the ads put like really, handsome guys with a cowboy hat and, with a smoke. And they're like, oh, this is great. But then it kind of changed. And again, it always plays back to authenticity and responsibility that falls back onto the designer himself or themselves, that you do have a responsibility to be real and authentic, and as a consumer to be aware that you're not going to fall for these things and you don't have to dive into them. Gucci sells a great velvet jacket, but it also sells those t-shirts with the ugly logos. Which one are you going for? These are conscious decisions that have to be done with a consumer that is aware. Awareness is so powerful, and authenticity is so powerful that it can overcome these things and they end up not having a need.
Maybe on the issue of authenticity, and I know the work you have done during the World Cup and the idea of branding and connecting this major world and global event with at the same time a city, a specific place, a specific location in the world. How was it for you, that challenge of being authentic, but at the same time positioning Doha in a global arena?
It was, so to give context, for 2.5 years, I did branding consultancy for FIFA, where we were tasked to develop the visual expression of the World Cup brand and the creative direction of the city dressing, meaning like all the decorative elements that went into the greater country. So once you enter the airport and experience the city, what does that look like in terms of the World Cup? And many different facets of Qatar had different opinions as to what can be done artistically, etc. But of course, being in brand, you also have to understand the audience. Not every audience is, artistic in that sense or has an artistic language. It was done in a way where each area of Qatar was divided into zones based on the audience and how they interact with the space. For example, we have the Souk Waqf, and Souk Waqf is it's a souk, it's a market, it's an open market, and people are chill, and people of all facets congregate there, and it's a hub. So it needed a more cultural standpoint. Msherib markets itself as a modern city, etc. And so the language that was done there served a different purpose. So different cities are experiential, other cities are more consumer driven. And so it was mindful of that. So even the need to use specific language had to be changed, like people entering the border from Saudi, we didn't really need English language to be branded across there. So it was just carefully like looking at the audience and being mindful of how they experience the city and not trying to dominate that experience.
And I go back because on your initial reflections, you emphasized the need for cities to brand themselves. In a way, you just said that we have too much branding and too less design. Thinking. How do you see that at the city level? Because we do see a competition. And again, the issue is this idea of the global and cities competing with each other to attract tourists, to attract investors. So we see a same rationale. But how do you reflect that at the city level? And Doha clearly had that branding exercise with the World Cup, but we see this with all major events.
The problem, branding, the term branding 20 years ago was a positive term, right? It's now becoming a little derogatory, yes? Because what's happened is, be it a city or a fashion company or anything else, if you're over branding but you're not designing, that's the issue.
Exactly.
That's the problem. So if you're a city, and I said this many, many years ago, and I think I said it here 15 years ago, that every city in the world has to brand itself. What I meant by that was, you build a beautiful project like Frank Gehry did in Bilbao, as an example. Bilbao was a little sleepy Spanish town. Nobody heard of Bilbao. Did anybody hear of Bilbao before the Guggenheim? You did? Okay, so we have two people. They get 12 million tourists a year going to a sleepy town, really, to experience a piece of architecture. The Eiffel Tower gets 24 million tourists looking at a rusty 200-year-old structure that's so dated. It was important at the time, obviously, one of the first steel structural buildings, but what is it now? So these artifacts, these landmarks, these pivotal projects brand a city. But if you you have a city and you have really nothing to offer, you can go and make all the commercials you want on television and make beautiful logo and mark and keep over branding it, but people won't return. And I just was in a city, I won't mention it, that's going through a crisis of tourism, major crisis, because they haven't really done anything in the city to really embrace tourism. So, and to do something in the city to embrace tourism, i.e. a nice artifact, interesting museums, interesting restaurants, I don't know, it doesn't really matter what it is. Interesting avant-garde hotels, which barely exist anywhere in the world. If you don't do these things, well, how are you going to encourage tourism? And then you brand the hell out of yourself for what? It's hypocrisy in a way. So I think this is the problem with this idea. And I love to look at little avant-garde shops everywhere in the world I can go, which I find very few. And there's a massive movement, for example, of, sort of hip-hop shops, right? And I go in these shops, good music playing, everything sort of looks a little cool. And what are they selling? T-shirts, over-branded with their name over everything. And at the end of the day, that's all they're selling. And in fact, or hoodies, or sweatpants. But these things are generic objects. In other words, they're not designing it.
Yeah.
They're just branding it. So, whether it's a city, it's like Manfredi's book, Spoon to City. It doesn't matter. It can be a spoon, right? It's got to be a good spoon. Then you brand it. Design the spoon first, And I always say this, that you don't even need to use a mark or a logo or anything if you design something really well. Because in itself, if it's authentic, as you mentioned, it's an authentic act, everybody will know that object or that thing or that building without seeing any name even written on it. So it's you understand what I'm saying. But branding today is completely essential. And I like what you talked about authenticity. You know why? Because if you brand yourself, as an example, that's the authenticity because you are you. You're not taking somebody else's brand and putting it on top of you as if you're a mannequin. You are yourself. I'll tell you about myself. Many people say, "Oh, you're a brand," right? No, I am who I am, meaning I live and breathe, I walk the walk, I talk the talk. How I design, I go to my home. My home is exactly like probably most of the hotels around the world I do. I am myself, and I'm a big believer in my passion and my vision, and I do that. I think that's legit, meaning it's not about branding myself. It's about I'm just being who I am.
Who you are.
I'll tell you a very quick funny story. Maybe you'll like this. You know Peter Eisenman, the architect? Okay, so I know Peter for years. So I go to his house, and he lives. He has a house in New Hampshire, and it's colonial. And I get to the house, it's all this colonial house, and I said to Peter, "But you do all this deconstructed architecture. If it was me, I would be living in a deconstructed house, right?" So this is where I would draw the line of what is authenticity, And the world we live in now, I just finished with this, I'm sorry to say, we have the opportunity for every one of us to hyper-personalize our existence. But a lot of the companies and manufacturers and developers are not giving us the options to afford us to do this. So a very simple example, the automobile. 20 years ago, I was working with Nissan, and I told them an idea I had, which was that you get your car on the computer, you have a bubble jet printer that makes 1 million colors. So you pick one of 1 million colors for your car. There's a spray booth, the way cars are done. The entire car goes into a spray booth. There's 160 little guns of spray. That's your big bubble jet printer. So you could pick any color of car of 1 million if you wanted. You could even scan your body and get the driver's seat custom for you and the other seats generic. These are ideas and discussions I've had with companies 20, 25 years ago. And with the technologies we have, you would think we would be living in a day and age right now where everything is completely personalized. But it's not.
Not yet.
Anyway, pass it on.
We are going that way. No, but I want to go back to the issue of authenticity. And of the work you are doing in Alula and your work in Alula, because it's exactly where you have the issue of you are intervening, you are reinterpreting, you are recreating a very old town, which is a UNESCO site. So how do you strike that balance, and where do you, as an architect, understand the limits to not go over what, of course, there are regulations, there are public policies that you have to compete, but where you as an architect feel that I've crossed the boundaries?
I have trouble defining authenticity, and it's a very, tricky word to claim that I can be authentic or not. Like, for me, I just like feel I'm navigating a minefield, and I try to not to mention it a lot or talk about it a lot, because it's hard to say this is authentic, this is not, this is not. In Al-Ula in particular, you know, or any preservation site, rehabilitation, reuse, as much as there is regulation, as you mentioned, guidelines, so many people are involved. So even as a designer, I cannot claim I'm the designer of this, because it's a collaboration of many people. But what is different from this context, you're given a context, you're giving a ruin, 12th century ruin, you have a context, there is a story about it, and then on the other part, if I'm designing on an empty land or an empty landscape or this, the enjoyment I find in doing these projects is that you are researching and looking for a language discovered from that place, rather than putting your own language, or even in an empty land. There is something, there is forces, there is derivatives. You can also distract or subtract or, you know, discover a language. It doesn't mean, it's not a plain, like in thin air, like nothing. There is always something to start from. But going back to Al-Ula or any historical site, you know, I try to be as less present as possible in terms of work. Like you try to get the morphology of the space, you try to get the materiality, it's a trial, because when you're with a ruin, you don't have a lot of documentation of what this looked like. You have like maybe half of one floor, but you don't know the second floor, how it was built. You know that it's a 2-story city, but you don't know much. And you're trying to get all these resources from either archiving, researching, walking, trials with materiality, getting like a template to work with. And you try not to like invent things that are too much precedent. And it depends, you know, you mentioned something that the architect has become a tool of a developer, and also a tool of a government and a politician. And so here my client is a government, RCU, Royal Commission. So they have their brief. You have the heritage have their brief. You have the UNESCO you have the archaeologicals have their brief.
And you have your brief.
Trying to make sense of all these briefs, and they all fight with each other, and you have to coordinate, and maybe you're the bad guy at the end. You know, you never know. Anyway, but it's a long process. And
Can I just say something about what you said? There was a sort of a sociologist and design critic back in the 80s, and his name was Peter Dormer, British. And he wrote a book about what he called below the line and above the line design. Below the line, if I design the cockpit of an airplane, it has to be designed. But below design means probably 99% of it is about making that thing work seamlessly for the pilots, right? So it's not like I can all of a sudden bring my own language or form or material. You know, it's really a difficult project, yes? Yeah. Some of what you're doing is a bit below the line design. So it's a little bit unfair to talk about authenticity on that level. If I design a line of ceramics or a line of, I don't know, glass and Murano vases, I'm acting almost more like an artist, meaning I kind of almost create my own criteria. I create my own, how can I say, what I want to say or communicate with the work. I'm free, because at the end of the day, a vase only needs to hold some water. You can do whatever you like, right? And the opportunity is infinitum. So there's below and there's above. And I think that's where you have to kind of separate this notion of authenticity. Because also, here's the real problem in this field. If you're designing a building and your developer is telling you what to do, you're not designing anything. There's no design. You are a service, strictly a service. And it's amazing how many so-called creative people or creative people who are suppressed with their creativity based on being pushed to only provide a service.
I think one Sorry, just one thing I would
coming
like
to our
to...
end, but...
It's just a few points that you've brushed upon with regard to design and over-design with respect to spaces. I think one of the challenges we faced recently is that a lot of the time that when urban mechanisms or urban landscape has now been shaped by economic decisions. So looking at the population from a consumer standpoint. So many cities and urban landscapes are designed for consumers, not looking people...
For citizens.
So you just look at them as consumers. You don't look at them as people who are experiencing the space in many ways. So a lot of cities, you just end up experiencing them as a consumer, whereas you can experience them in so many other ways as well.
I wish we had more time. And
well,
I really feel...
We get 3 more minutes, right?
Yeah, we are kind of... They were asking to
just
conclude.
Push. We don't need dinner tonight.
What I would like to suggest is, of course, the speakers. We still will be here and we'll stay around, and we'd love to carry on these conversations with each of you. And so I would really like to thank our lovely speakers for coming here. And of course, I'm hoping that you have taken some food for thought. And that you carry on these conversations among yourselves and among others. So thank you so much. And we come to the conclusion of this first panel of today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
George, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Shahira, thank you.
Thank you.